Mertens.
Thank you. Can you see my screen?
Yes, perfect.
Ah, great. Okay. So thank you very much for having me here in this workshop. So I'll try to talk why else life cycle assessment is so crucial at Énegie. I've heard it's a lot about CO2, and I think everybody is correctly and rightly obsessed with CO2. And I'm not saying we should not be obsessed with CO2, but I think what life cycle assessment learns is that we should not only be obsessed with CO2 and global warming. And so in my presentation, I'll try to talk and present a little bit about that. I think the way that we will have access to critical minerals and metals is going to be crucial if we want to succeed in this energy transition and this carbon neutrality by 2050 or the 2 degrees scenario. If we want to succeed, having sustainable access or access to sustainable critical metals is going to be metals and minerals. In fact, is going to be crucial. And then a second topic I want to talk a little bit about is this nexus between energy and water. And this will, as I will explain, be also increasingly more important for our energy transition. And finally, at the end, I hope I will talk about CO2, but I will try to convince you that we should not only see CO2 as an issue or a problem, but I think we should see it as a resource, and in fact start loving CO2 instead of only seeing it as a big problem. So my name is Jan Mertens. I'm a Chief Science Officer at Énegie. I think Énegie, everybody knows Énegie. We're a large international utility, so it's about gas, electricity, and energy services. Énegie does have the ambition to be the leader in this carbon neutral energy transition, and we try to walk the talk. And of course, being from Énegie Research, the research department of Énegie, we are convinced that the research and development and innovation is so important to reach this carbon neutrality, to succeed in the energy transition. So we've got about 23 thematic labs. It means that we're about 23 topics that Énegie Research, our 900 researchers, are actually working on within Énegie. So we have a lab on solar, a lab on wind, a lab on hydrogen, a lab on storage, of course, not only electricity storage, but also gas storage. So we've got these 23 thematic labs. And I think what is important to emphasize here is that one of our labs is actually an environmental and societal lab. So we've got about 10 to 15 people focusing only on life cycle assessment and social impact assessments, meaning that we dedicated a full lab to it, and I'll try to explain why it's so important. So these are 23 thematic labs. As I said, we're about 900, and this is the environmental and society lab focusing on environment and society. This lab, of course, as the other labs, is not only working internally, so it's well connected to all of the other labs, but also, of course, to the external academic world. And I think most of you will be familiar with the SCORE LCA, but of course, we have a lot more international collaborations as well. So what do we do within these 23 thematic labs? Last slide on Énegie, and I promise I won't talk about Énegie anymore. What do we do in these 23 thematic labs with our internal and external partners? Well, we try to, we're not a technology developer such as General Electric or Alstom or Siemens. What we try to do is, in many of the cases, there are exceptions. We try to increase the maturity of technology. So we like to pilot, demonstrate things together with partners, together with external partners, so that in the end they become mature enough so that they can be taken up by our business units, of course, in their daily business, in their bids. And so a nice example, I won't go into all of them, but a nice example of this, why pilots are so key, is this bifacial solar testing here, which is done in Chile. So over the last 5 or even a little bit longer years, we've been testing these PV panels, which actually can harvest energy or light, if you wish, from both sides. So we've been testing this in an R&D environment with these panel developers for quite a long time. And today they have been taken up by our business unit in their current offers and bids. I won't explain all the rest, but what is clear that in all these new, how do you call them, renewable or low carbon technologies, metals and minerals are really crucial, because if you have a look back in the 1700s, for example, and I quite like this slide, if we had a little bit of coal, a little bit of calcium for our cement, and iron, really, with respect to our energy, we could do what we wanted, right? Now, over the years, as the industrial revolutions and cars came in place, and now, since the 2000s, it's clear we need a lot more minerals and metals. And so having access in a sustainable way is really crucial, because it's not only more, so different elements, but for all the elements, we will need exponentially more of them. And so it means much more mining, and of course that has to be done in a sustainable way. And the funny, or the coincidence is that actually as recent as last Friday, the IEA published a report on this issue of critical metals. And so they showed, comparable to this slide, actually, that a conventional car uses a lot less of these critical raw materials than, for example, an electrical car. And also our renewables, our wind and PVs, if you express it per megawatt hour of electricity produced, need a lot more of these metals. So these are the metals that were considered in this IEA study. You see, for an electric car, you need over 200 kilograms per vehicle of these metals, while for a conventional car, we're about 30. Same for offshore, onshore wind, PV wind. We need a lot more of these metals as compared to our dirty, old, fossil-based coal and natural gas in the electricity generation. So, the IEA actually alerts that there will not be enough. So they alert that there is actually a mismatch between our energy ambitions, so our energy ambitions being hydrogen, onshore wind, more PV, and actually the access that we will have to many of these metals. And so this is the last slide that I took from their analysis published last week. It is only for copper, lithium, and cobalt. So let's take the cobalt example, for example. So this is if we want to reach our 2-degree scenario, or in this case, with the IEA, it's a sustainable development scenario. This is the amount of cobalt that is predicted that we will need to reach this target. And of course, cobalt is an important one in lithium-ion batteries. So if you have a look at what we need and what we'll actually have, so the dark green is the mines in operation today, the yellow or green is what will be installed in the future. Well, there's clearly a mismatch between our ambitions that we need, so the amount of metals that we need, and what we'll actually have access to. So the problem of these minerals is maybe not having enough, or not having fast enough. But there's a second problem, which, according to me, is possibly even more important, and this is related, of course, to this environmental impact of this material extraction. And so a recent UN study, I think it was published 2 years ago, actually showed that carbon emissions related to materials extraction is actually half of the world's carbon emissions is actually related to this resource extraction. And if you talk about biodiversity, well, this UN report actually warns that about 80% of our overall biodiversity loss is actually related to this resource extraction. So it's clear that maybe we won't have enough. We really need to increase our efforts to do it in a sustainable way, not only for carbon, but also for biodiversity. And then there's a third issue, which is the ethical issues. And cobalt is again a nice example there, or not a nice, a sad example maybe, because about 80%, it's a little bit less now, about 75% of the cobalt comes from Congo, and there we know that it's not always mined under the conditions ethically and socially that we are after, and child labor, for example, is important there. So we'll need more. We need to do it in a sustainable, and of course, recycling is also an option, and recycling really needs to increase because today it is far too low, especially with respect to these critical metals or minerals that we will need for the energy transition. So this last slide from the IEA actually shows that for the battery packs of electrical vehicles, even by 2040, we will only recycle about 12% of the metals that are in this battery pack of an electric car. Today, it's peanuts, huh? But even by 2040, it will still only be 12%. So it's clear that recycling is going to be part of the solution, and we should increase our efforts in this drastically in the coming months. On top of course, having access to new sustainable materials and metals. So voilà, I think we should not only be obsessed with CO2, as I said, and this raw material issue is a real one, I think, and is only becoming more and more in their attention now. And water, of course, I think is also not high enough on our agenda with respect to this energy transition. And water used to be something far away from our bed. It used to be a problem maybe in the south of France, of course, in French, but in Belgium and Netherlands, we never thought that water was a big issue. But if you look at the last 2 summers, we were not allowed to wash our cars anymore, not allowed to irrigate our lawns. So even here now, I think the people and the public are starting to realize that we should probably think a little bit more circular in terms of our water use and think about how we can consume less and recycle more. For energy, of course, water has been crucial also for our fossil technologies with respect to cooling, of course. But now, as I said, with the move to renewables and low carbon, well, the mining, for example, of these minerals already uses a lot of water. And so water pollution there is a true issue. But also for hydrogen, if we really go into this hydrogen economy that everybody's talking about, well, we need about 10 kilograms of water for 1 kilogram of hydrogen. And this water has to be extremely pure, by the way, for most of the technology. So water is going to be crucial on top of the minerals if we want to succeed in this energy transition. And again, there, LCA is great because we have water footprinting methods. It helps us understanding and identifying where the most impacting processes is. So this brings us to more of an anecdote, because in the US, already in Texas, for example, where people there's a proverb saying that whiskey is for drinking and water is for fighting over. In fact, a funny anecdote related to this is what happened in Venezuela back in 2017. There was a serious drought in Venezuela back in 2017. And of course, since most of the electricity in Venezuela is coming from hydropower, there was actually a shortage of electricity. And so and you can find it on YouTube, actually, just type in President of Venezuela. So the President of Venezuela came on national television urging women to stop using their hair dryers because there was this electricity shortage because of the water shortage. And he was saying that they should actually just go out and walk in the wind and use their fingers through their hair instead of using electricity to dry their hair. Just a funny anecdote on how this water energy relaxes is interrelated. And we should really think about this much more with respect to our energy transition, because I don't think we want presidents choosing our hairstyles, right? We really have to avoid this. Okay, so finally, I promised at the end I would also try to convince you that we should try to start to see CO2 a little bit different and maybe learn to love it and not only see it as an issue. What we're doing today is, of course, we're using, in this case, methane, natural gas. We're taking it out of the ground. We're burning it in our infrastructure for heat or power or electricity. And then, of course, this increases the CO2 in our atmosphere, which, as you all know, leads to global warming. What we think, if we think more circular, and what we are having a lot of R&D and a lot of efforts on within Énegie and Énegie research, is that we should try to stop taking this natural gas out of the ground and actually see the CO2 in the atmosphere as a resource. So this could look like this. Well, this looks like this. It's not could look. We are working on this. This is happening today. We should take CO2 out of the atmosphere, and we can do that using technologies, or we could also do that using biomass if you wish. And that CO2, we can try to let it react with water. In fact, in many cases, it will not be CO2 plus water. It will be CO2 plus hydrogen, which you will make from this water, and of course, a renewable electricity source. So you let your CO2 react with your hydrogen, and we turn it into our natural gas again. I say natural gas, of course, we can no longer call it natural gas now. We call this a synthetic gas or an e-gas, the gas made from electricity, which we can then use in our existing transport and usage infrastructure. And of course, this will emit CO2 again. This is like a perfect circular economy of carbon or CO2. And so we're piloting quite a few pilots on this within Énegie, and have great ambitions in this upcoming technology. And of course, the day after tomorrow, we should also think about maybe part of this CO2, whether we could not actually store it away as well, so we can actually become carbon negative. And of course, I'm not saying that we should no longer electrify and use electricity immediately. I think there's no time to go in there, but of course there is a kind of a logic in this. And I think the first thing we should do is continue and even further increase our efforts on energy efficiency. Then the second one is electrify as much as possible, and far beyond just our electrical cars. Also in the industry, we should electrify as much as possible. But for part of the challenge to get there, things as long-term energy storage, we know batteries are not suited for that. It's better done using molecules. We know hydrogen is not very much suited for that either. So there we possibly need to go back to some hydrocarbons. Also for linked distance transport of renewable energy, we will need to continue energy, not this time renewable, from other continents. And there also, this will probably have to be done, not probably, we will need to do that under the form of molecules. Hydrogen, again, being a very challenging one. We know that having access to e-fuels will be crucial and part of the equation after having reduced and increased our energy efficiency and after having electrified as much as possible. Just one example of Énegie where we do this, where we take the CO2 and we make it react with hydrogen, is actually in this Métis Centre project, which is done by Storengy together with us, with Énegie Research. Here we actually take the CO2 out of the atmosphere as well as you wish, but first through a biogas installation. So this is bio waste from plants, bio waste which is actually gasified, and in this biogas actually contains up to 45% of CO2, which we can then capture out of it, which leaves us pure biomethane, which we can use or inject. This CO2, biogenic CO2, so this is not from a fossil source, it's from a bio source. We can make it react with our hydrogen coming from our renewable electricity and turn it into, this time not a natural hydrogen, but a synthetic, natural gas, but our synthetic gas, our synthetic methane, which we can then also inject or use it as you wish. So this is one of the, there are many more, but just to give you an idea of real projects that we're working on. But even if you look here, here in this catalytic methanation, you'll need a lot of metals, catalyzers, and some of them are critical. Same for wind, same for PV, and especially also platinum, for example, you will need also here in your electrolyzer. So metals will be crucial for you, but water as well. Here you need pure water. Also here you will have wastewater to treat. So water is equally important as, voilà, even in this slide, it shows you that, and metals and water and CO2, of course, because it's the main driver behind why we do this is important. So why should we start loving CO2 and seeing it as a resource? I think we should go from what we do today. This is just the last slide on what we do today. Today we take 2 fossil units, let's say natural gas, out of the ground, if you wish, and we use them in our industry. And of course, this leads to 2 units of CO2 being emitted. What we already should do today, and what we are doing already, is only taking 1 out of the ground, capturing this CO2 from our industry, using it as a resource together with our green hydrogen coming from our green electricity, and making a second synthetic fuel now. And of course, the CO2 is then still emitted. So we're not there yet, because we're still taking 1 out of the ground and still emitting 1. So this is not there yet. Having said that, it's already a reduction of 50% of CO2 emissions, which is already a great help. Of course, and what we are really after is that we should take both of them, use both of these CO2s as a resource and turn it back into a fuel. So we're perfectly circular, or not negative, perfectly neutral. That's the word I was after, carbon neutral in this case. And of course, as I said, after that, we should also think about taking some of that CO2 and also storing it away. So I think, or I hope that having talked a little bit about these new technologies, LCA is really crucial to ensure what we do today. And so having our expertise within Énegie is very important to us, and that's why we actually turn it into a lab as well. So if you're curious about more sustainable technologies that we're working on, you can actually go here. This is an external report which we published a little bit earlier on all these new emerging technologies. And it's not, you can see we're not only talking about emerging technologies, we're talking about emerging sustainable technologies, and life cycle assessment is a part of that in most of in all of these actually. So I will stop it here and maybe take some questions if there are any, or remarks or comments.
Yes, thank you.